Well, we left off with our Plan Z carb tuning a couple of days ago. We had done a basic plug run at idle and then above idle to see what the flow characteristics were. And we started off with very conservative jetting on here. We put a pair of 64s in the front and a pair of 65s in the back. So in the meantime, when it was nice and quiet here first thing in the morning, I took the car out and made a quick run up the street. And we found that it was dead lean. Now, for the first time, it actually pulled above that 4,000 RPM mark. It shot up to about 5,000 RPM, but it was like shooting ducks and angry, right? So, pull it back in here, and I pulled the plugs, and I found that they were and across the board, even the end cylinders, it was just dead lean. So, I made my first jet change with it, and I went from 64s and 65s in the back to 70s and 72s in the back. So 70s in the front, 72s in the back. And then this morning, first thing in the morning, before anybody was around, I went and made a run with it. And let's show you the results. So you see our end cylinders, where we were like dead fat before, are showing nice color. Still a tad on the fat side. And remember, we went to a hotter heat range plug on each of these end cylinders. So they're showing color. They're still a little fat, but I'm fine with that. Number two that had shown a little color is now showing, actually that's what I'd like to eventually see from these end plugs, but we'll get to that. And here we've got the same thing. So we've got, I would say, number 2 and number 5 are running optimum. They're about perfect. But we're still crazy lean right here. So now we're going to make a change to affect these two cylinders. Now, before we get into that, and we're going to do a whole jet change, because like for a lot of you guys, we're talking abstract things. You know, okay, we talk about jets, we talk about jet changing, but what exactly is it? So we're going to actually do the whole step-by-step, everything you need to know how to change jets on one of these carburetors. But before I do that, I want to address a bunch of comments from the last video. So overwhelmingly, let's see, there were a bunch of very common comments. Overwhelmingly, a lot of you guys were like, put side drafts on it. It needs 3 2-barrels, or it needs 3 1-barrels, or it needs multiple carburation, or build a sheet metal intake manifold, or build an even runner intake manifold. And while I do agree with you, there's no question that would be a superior thing. If you look at the Ruster, the feature we did on the Ruster, the day after, you'll notice that he's running 1160s in the quarter mile. And he's running 1160s with the same intake manifold I have here. And he has an Edelbrock carburetor on the thing. He has a 750, or a Carter AFB, has a 750 AFB on there. And he's running just fine. So until I get to that point, where if I reach a wall, if I get this thing down into the 11s, and I reach a wall with it, at that point I'll consider going with a much more exotic intake manifold setup. But until I can run at least as good as the cars that are currently out there, there's no sense, it would be pointless. Let's get this optimized and go from there. Okay, another very, very common observation or comment that you guys made. You were like, turn the carburetor this way. Turn the carburetor, so I've got the carburetor facing north and south, right? And you're suggesting to turn the carburetor east to west. Well, my friends, we're already way past that point. When I first started screwing around with this thing, I had a relatively stock engine in here. I had a low compression Slant Six with just very minor porting and an RV cam. And I had a 600 Edelbrock on it. And on this intake manifold, the original orientation of it is that way. It's the east-west instead of north-south. Well, what I found with that setup was that these two end cylinders were just drowned in fuel. Like, I mean, terrible. And I played around with jetting, and I kept taking jet away from it, until the motor was just lean. It fell on its face, it wouldn't run. But those two end cylinders were still dead fat rich. So with the carburetor in that east-west orientation, I've got these two end cylinders. Each one of them is being fed by an idle circuit. So it only exacerbated the situation. So to fix that, and it did work, I turned the carburetor this way. I made this adapter plate here, and I turned the carburetor east to west. So now, or north to south, I should say. So now these two cylinders are each feeding off of just one idle circuit. Now, if I turned it, let's say this way, to get the idle circuit away from these end carburetors, and put the primary barrels here, well, now I would have my primary barrels feeding these two cylinders primarily. And so that's why this carburetor is set up on here now in this north to south orientation. I've only got one idle circuit feeding these ends, and as you can see by the plug readings so far, I have no complaints with this. I'll take that and run it the way it is. That's great. I do know that if I turned it the other way, I would have these two cylinders much, much darker and these two much, much leaner. So that's why the carburetor is oriented this way instead of this way. A lot of you mentioned spacers, talked about, add spacers. And there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There is much spacer testing on this combination in the future. As it is right now, this is only an adapter. It's an adapter that I made just to mount the carburetor this way. But eventually I'll try a 1, 2, 2.5, 3 inch. I'll go as many spacers as I have to get optimum performance. But we're not there yet. The first thing we need to do is figure out how much fuel this thing needs. If you notice, there's no seal between the scoop and the velocity stack, and the reason for that is I haven't made any type of seal yet, is because I plan on experimenting with spacers. So if I make a seal to do this all now, then I'll have to redo it and make twice the work for myself when it comes time to mess with spacers. So all of that said, so that we covered the comments and the high points from the last video, I want to bring you guys up to speed on a jet change with this. So I've determined now that I like the overall balance of it, but I need to fatten these two center cylinders. So currently we have 70s and 72s, both inner and outer are 70s, both inner and outer are 72s. So I'm going to go to a 76 and a 78, only on this side, and leave the current jets that are in on this side. So let me go get the tools and a couple of jets, and we'll pull this thing apart and we'll show you guys how to do this real quick. Okay, so what we're going to do here applies to all double pumper style carburetors, Holley carburetors. Singles are similar, but so anyway, before you attempt anything like this, the first thing you want to do is get yourself a set of these non-stick gaskets, right? The factory gaskets, the original gaskets they put on these things, Satan himself designed them. They stick and they don't come apart. You cannot get this thing apart in any form of like intactness. So the very first thing you want to do is take your time, take the carburetor off the car, take the bowls off, take the meter and blocks off, break those gaskets, get those gaskets all clean. And then while you're at it, check the flatness of the main body, when we did a video about that. But anyway, to do this effectively, you need these non-stick gaskets. All right, so tools necessary. We need a 1 inch and a 5/8 open end wrench to break our fuel lines. We need screwdrivers. And a spray can cap like that comes in handy to catch gasoline when you can do that, when you can get the cap underneath the carburetor. So I'll show you what we'll do here. All right, so first things first. We're going to remove one of the bolts, one of the screws. On each of the bowls, and this will let the gasoline drain out. Okay, one. Coming. Be mindful that to put the screws back in the holes they came from, because there's the little bowl gaskets and sometimes they'll stick to the screw, and sometimes they'll stick to the carburetor. So if you just make sure that you put the screws back in the holes they came from, you don't have to worry about that. So, that done. Fuel lines. Sometimes you don't have to back them up. You just give it a shot like that and it'll loosen. But if you go to turn this and this is turning with it, you just put your 1 inch on there and hold it. Like that one, see? That one's turning the whole piece. Okay, that's that. Pop the rest of these screws out of here. I'm working blind. I'm in the shadows here. Okay. I'm not used to doing this while standing out of the way for the camera, so I'm a little uncoordinated here. Alright, so there's our bowl, and then here's our jets, and we're just going to make our changes to those inside. Oh, it's really on there. Okay, we're just going to make our changes to the inside barrels. So here's that one out, here's this one in. I should have grabbed a slightly broader screwdriver. Okay, that's that. And now to the back. Come on. And now our jets are in. Make sure it's seated good. Okay. Alright, so now when you go to put the bowls back on, slide the screws all the way out like this, because you've got to slip the accelerator pump lever, or the accelerator pump arm here under the lever. So you got to do a little twisting to get it on there, right? There we go. Okay. And you want to tighten these relatively evenly because you can warp the body or the meter and block. So you want to make sure you go fairly evenly with them. Don't overdo it. If you get them just tight, okay? Just about like that. And you have a leak, then just stop and replace whatever gasket is leaking. Don't gorilla them down. Biggest mistake people make with Holley carburetors. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing here. Slide the screws all the way in, like that, but leave them in place. I'm going to slip the accelerator pump arm under the lever, and then run our screws in. Okay. All right, now we put our fuel line back on. You only tighten one side of these at a time, or actually, you know, get them both started before you tighten any of them down, because these can be tricky. You don't want to cross thread this, especially like if you're at the track. Okay, that's it. That's it. We have done a jet change. So let's turn the fuel pump on. Make sure we got nothing leaking or dripping. And we don't. Okay. Alright, so let's put the plugs back in here. And light it up. I saw somebody did a video where they were changing the spark plugs on a Slant Six. I think it was Vice Grip. I think Vice Grip was changing a spark plug on a Slant Six. That's what he bought. And he was like, God, how many turns is this? Well, it's 13 turns. It's 13 turns to get these things seated in and out. That's it. Same for your small block Mopar and your 426 Hemi. And yeah, I know it's supposed to take the cross washers off when you use drool tubes. I know, I just didn't. I don't gorilla my plugs down. I make them just a little more than cute. Okay. And then, let's see. 1, 5, 3, 6, 2, and 4. Let's light her up. Alright, so all is well. She's ready to go out and make another pass. And here's where we go with the clickbait cliffhanger. I'm not going to run it right now. We're going to go out on Saturday. At least that's, weather permitting, we're clear to go Saturday night and see what this thing's going to do with the track. And we'll do our jet change, our next jet change, jet check, plug check, will be at the track Saturday night. That's it. I hope you got something out of that. I'll see you tomorrow.